Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and I wanted to talk about 2020 a bit. But not the year of hell that we all had, just the year of pride and hell mixed together that I had in my Year of Socks challenge to myself. So, an unofficial thing that I did to myself was I decided that I was going to make one pair of socks for every month of the year. The problem with this is that, well, I didn't really commit to it. I learned a lot about myself over the course of this year, and there were several challenges. And I'm not blaming myself for not sticking to it. Spoiler alert, I did not make 12 pairs of socks last year. But it's kind of interesting what happened, how it happened, and kind of my response to it, and what I did wind up learning about myself. So it wasn't a waste of time. At the very least, I wound up with several pairs of socks that are mine. Yeah, nice new pairs. So let's start at the beginning. In January, I just made a pair of socks. It's this pair right here, white with the little blue stripes. I'm going to take pictures of all the ones that I still have. But this pair I just happened to make in January. They were my same basic pattern that I always make, and I really enjoyed it. Anklets are my favorite. They only use about half a hanky yarn, and I loved it, had fun, made socks. No big deal. Then February happened, and I wound up with my husband going to Arizona, and I bought some yarn locally there. Wound up getting it wrapped into a ball and wound into a ball, and wound up, wish that was on purpose. Wound up casting on a pair of socks. In fact, this pair of socks while I was there. Finished them actually fairly quickly. So on average, up to this point, it's taken me 2 to 3 weeks to complete a pair of socks. So finishing this pair in about a week and a half or so was pretty good for me, and I really enjoyed it. Then in March, I started a pair of socks with Patton's Croy. And at this point, I realized this is the third month in a row I'm making a pair of socks. So this is when I decide that I'm going to make one pair of socks a month. So first mistake I made is making a goal just kind of arbitrarily because a pattern was already forming. That does not mean I was actually devoted to this goal. I never was. But just thought, let's see if I can do this. So anyway, the March pair of socks I started with Patton's Croy, and I noticed something really quickly because I was doing 2 at a time toe up, and I noticed that one was considerably darker than the other. I got up a considerable way, and it wasn't just that one was further along in the color scheme. I kind of accepted that I wasn't going to get identical twin socks. I was more likely going to get fraternal twin socks. But one was quite a bit darker than the other. And I looked on the ball, and the ball band actually specified they came from 2 different dye lots. I hadn't checked when I purchased them. So I was like, okay, I have a couple of options. I can keep going as is. I can cut the yarn and switch the balls periodically, so that way I wind up with better matching fraternal twins. You know, one would be dark, light, dark, and the other one would be light, dark, light. But, you know, they have more in common just being that kind of opposite bit from each other. Ultimately, I decided I was just going to keep going. And it turns out when I posted the complaint on Facebook, somebody actually told me that this is very common in Patton's Croy socks, where You don't wind up with identical twins. You're always starting at a different point in the pattern repeat, or there's a slight color variation, especially with Patton's Croy FX. So just kind of something you got to accept with that yarn. And I was fine with it. And I'm lazy. I didn't want to weave in any extra ends. So I just kept going. Got to the Fleegle Heel, completed the Fleegle Heel, and instead of the Fleegle Heel adding 2 inches or so like it normally does, it added 3. So my socks were 1 inch longer than I intended. And that made them about 1/2 inch too long for my foot, because I was planning to make it about 1/2 to 1/4 inch smaller than my foot for negative ease purposes. So at this point, it's like, okay, I don't want to have to undo this. What am I going to do? So I call my husband's grandmother and say, hey, do you want a pair of socks? What size do you wear? And I'm a size 7. She's a size 8, I believe. Her foot's 1/4 inch longer than mine. I even had her measure it when I got a little freaky outy because I couldn't find consistent information online. By the way, officially, size 7s are 9 1/4 inches long, and size 8s are 9 1/2 inches long, but both of our feet were 1/4 inch smaller than that, just so as you know. So anyway, I've already done the heel, and it's like, okay, well, I want them to fit her. I don't want her having loose toes or anything. So I decide that once I finish the socks, I will cut the toes, do surgery, frog the toes to 1/2 inch before where the toes started. I used a lifeline. Don't worry about that. I did not make that mistake. But I wound up having so much trouble with this. Like, the lifeline was the least of my worries, because when you're starting from the toe going up, you're doing increases. I like to make one left increases, which involve picking up the bar between stitches, twisting it, and doing a loop through that, which means that that bar is actually going through the little loop, like that. I know that looks suggestive. I'm not meaning it that way. But because of this, occasionally, about every other row, you have 4 stitches. You actually have to pull the yarn through instead of just a kind of pulling the loops out. So it's not pulling loops out. It's actually, I can't do it with my hands. And it just looks like I'm telling you to have sex. Anyway. So because I was doing that, a lot of the yarn started to fray. And I wound up just cutting really close, going a couple of rounds, and then tying in some of my leftover yarn and knitting the toe down in the Kitchener ink. I had just enough on the darker sock that I beat Yarn Chicken by this much. That was the only lucky thing with this pair of socks. At this point, I was so frustrated. And by the way, quick piece of advice. If you're going to do surgery on any of your knits, do it the next day. Don't do it after midnight, because you're going to get extra frustrated because you are extra tired. Do it when you're feeling a little bit fresh and kind of emotionally up for the challenge. It'll go much smoother, just because your attitude will be in the right place. So I was so frustrated that I wound up giving the socks to my husband's grandmother right away, and I didn't even get a picture. I just have this partial picture that I posted on a Facebook group. Concurrently, while I was making this pair of socks, I started on the April socks a little bit early. And in April, I decided that I was going to make socks that were going to be really long and accommodate my calf, because I actually have normal size ankles and normal width feet, but I have really thick calves and my feet look very short. I blame ballet. I did 24 years of ballet. My legs are a little bit warped when it comes to muscle structure and everything. And point shoes when I was 10 kind of squashed my feet a bit. There's a reason they usually recommend waiting until you're about 11 or 12 for most students to go up on toe. I was a bit young. Anyway, so I decided that I was going to make these socks, and I have a picture here. Notice how big they get kind of early on. Yeah, I mean, the pattern went just fine, but I wound up, they fall down. I went too big, too fast, they fall down. I pretty much never wear them, despite the fact that the feet fit perfectly fine. But hey, they count, they're done. I don't plan to undo them. They're probably just never going to get worn unless I get really chubby really fast. And since I'm doing Weight Watchers, that is not the intent. But anyway, May, I actually made 2 official pairs of socks. So first, I made one of my students a pair of socks. And it had this really pretty yarn that was left over from a shawl project I had done. And then I wasn't sure if I had enough for the toes and the heels as well. So I did that in a contrasting yarn that I did wind up cracking into a new hank of yarn for that. And she loved them. They were the Rose City Rollers pattern. But instead of the heel flap, I did the FLK heel I had just learned. And she loved them, by the way. That was awesome. Then, using that same contrast color, I made myself a pair of faux cable socks, which these are them. I never took a picture of my student socks, but I promise they're very pretty. And so I made these socks. Yeah, they look a little bit, kind of worn. It's the nature of the yarn that I use. They're actually in pretty good shape. But I had enough of that yarn left over that officially the next month in June, so like beginning of June, I made my friend a pair of socks that also used this color in toe and heel contrast colors. And this is his sock on his foot. So yeah, very pretty. This one was really interesting because it was just a pretty basic sock pattern, but when I was using it, I basically had the opportunity to use a ball of yarn that I wasn't going to use for myself. It had a few too many colors. I had no idea what it was. It's one of those things where I knew I needed the ball of yarn, but whatever I made with it wasn't going to be mine. And I was right because I gave it to my friend. Then technically later that month, though I'm counting them as my July socks. So you notice I've got extra socks. I'm technically over a month early at this point. Was my best friend's birthday. And I asked her what she wanted and she said, you know what? I'd love a pair of bed socks. So my friend has eczema, so she puts lotion on her hands and her feet every night, and she wears socks and gloves so that the lotion doesn't rub off on her sheets throughout the night. So I made her a pair. This isn't actually the pair, but I made her a pair that's identical to this pair, which is a pair I made for myself over a year ago, closer to 2 years ago. So she really enjoyed that. I enjoyed making those. That's the Marley Birds My First Knit Socks Cuff Down pattern, which you can find on YouTube. I'll link that in the description. In fact, I'll link as many of the items and patterns and yarns that I use, as much as I can remember. I'll link them all in the description box down below. Then my official August socks were just a vanilla pair of socks. And I'm going to try and find this image because I started trying to make the Hermione's Everyday Socks. But I was using Patton's Croy again. These do fit. I have now made 2 pairs of socks with these balls of yarn. But the Hermione's Everyday Socks have the occasional purl stitch to create this texture pattern. And in doing that with such stripes, it didn't look good. Like the stripes look kind of wavy and a little funky, and I didn't like that. It's one of those cases where this yarn, because it's self-striping, just kind of looks better when you do it with something plain. So I wound up on the first sock laddering down at every time I needed to do purls to undo the purls and hook my way back up with plain stockinette stitch. Needless to say, they look very nice. And they're honestly my current favorite pair of socks to wear. They're so comfortable. I did cuff down about 15 rounds of 2x2 rib, FLK heel, and I did, I think, the rounded toe from the Rose City Rollers pattern. And I love them. I wear them constantly. But yeah, that was quite a bit of surgery again. I've had 3 pairs of socks at this point that did not go to plan. And I mean, they all wound up fine. And they all wound up good because I did the surgery. It's just that they were not happy knits for a little period there. Anyway, at this point, it's like the end of July. And I've actually done extra pairs of socks. I'm technically good through September. So I wound up focusing for a while on Christmas knitting. And so I kind of got distracted from the socks. And then in October, I just really didn't feel like making socks. So I didn't. It's like, okay, I'll be a month behind. I'll do 2 pairs in November, 1 in December, and I'll be golden. And then I cast on this pair of socks. If you see my knitting in the round video, you see me struggling to work on this pair of socks. It is January as of this recording, and I still haven't finished them. And needless to say, I never wound up making any other pairs of socks. In fact, well, I did make a pair. It was my Christmas Eve cast on, and it was this pair of socks. You know, it's the other half of the balls from my August socks. And I think I did manage to just finish them like before the New Year. So I guess these are my December socks. But that's all I did. I missed out on 2 months. Officially did not make 12 pairs of socks, only made 10. And I'm okay with that because I learned a few things about myself. One is that I like my sock patterns to be relatively simple. I like simple stitch or texture patterns. I don't mind having a texture pattern, but I'd rather have something simple that's kind of mindless that I'm just going around and around and around with versus something complicated, because these complex socks, these light blue pair, doesn't have simple stitches. There are twisted double decreases that I have to do, and twisted left leaning and twisted right leaning decreases. There's twisted rib. And although most of it is stockinette, there's these horrible stitches, and I just don't enjoy doing it. So what I think I'm going to actually do is I'm going to make some leg warmers with these. I think there's enough that if I do it, I'm going to do one of 2 things. Either I'm going to do toe-up socks that hopefully would reach my knee just until I run out of yarn, in which case I'll be doing 2 at a time, toe-up. Or I'm going to make split toe leg warmers where you've got a little piece on your foot right here, no heel, and then it goes up to about your knee or your calf or wherever you can get it to go to. I haven't made up my mind, but I'm ready for something that's just straight knitting. I'm still not in a position where I have the mental faculty for anything too particularly difficult right now. And I think I'd really enjoy wearing the leg warmers, especially if I get them done soon and it's still a bit cold outside. So I think that's what I might wind up doing. Also, I realized that because these goals, this goal that I made is quite arbitrary, I wasn't too connected to it in the beginning. And I had this deadline, but it was arbitrary. 12 pairs of socks in 12 months. And it was fun for a while, and then I lost steam. And looking back, I lost steam in about July. And this isn't the first time I lost steam in about July. In about 2018, I did the Moogly crochet along. And about every 2 weeks, she comes out with a new square by a different designer, and you can make it along with everybody else. It's a lot of fun, but I got started a little late, and I wound up completely losing steam at about July. And I wound up not doing it for almost the entire rest of the year until I had all my Christmas making done, and I wound up over the next month finishing it up. Also with Jada and Stitches in 2020, I did her calendar blanket, and about July, August, September, I wound up a couple months behind. I caught up in October and November, and by December, I pretty much finished about with everybody else. But I always lose steam at about that time. Part of it's because I own a tutoring company and tutoring picks up in the fall. But it's just that I don't have the attention span for that. So I think that for me at least, I'm not going to take on any more year-long projects. I think the max I can expect from myself is about 6 months. And that's fine. It's what works for me. Because ultimately, a lot of these things like these goals, things we tell ourselves we have to get done, they're arbitrary. Nobody's making us do it. In fact, unless somebody's paying you money to get something done by a certain time, all of our goals are arbitrary. We don't have to make things for Christmas. We don't have to give somebody something we've made for their birthday. We don't have to be on time. We don't even have to do it at all. It's something we're putting on ourselves, and I feel that if we make these things important, like I can't have so many whips, or I need to get this done by this time, we're putting undue pressure on ourselves. And we're just making it harder to keep ourselves motivated. There are things you can do if you're having motivation troubles to get stuff done, and I'll probably make a video about that at some point, but just know that nobody's making you do this except for yourself, so stressing out about it is completely pointless. And, do it if it's something that's entertaining, like keeping track of my socks was fun for me. Making a list was fun for me. And I enjoyed it while I was doing it, and then I lost motivation and I just didn't do it. And I was fine. And now it's 2021 and I've got this pair of socks that I need to undo, and I'll be fine because life's moving on. And it's not the end of the world that I didn't complete something I set out to complete. And I think realizing real priorities is something that'll help a lot of us out with our mental health, because mental health is something that I think a lot of us are struggling with these days. Anyway, I hope you were entertained by this. I know I bitch about these socks an awful lot. It's been a good 26 minutes of recording. Hopefully shorter after I cut it down a bit. But I hope you found it entertaining. And tell me some of the knitting or crochet struggles you've had. What goals did you fail at? Let me know in the comments down below. I think we can all use a little bit of entertainment right now. I hope you found this helpful. Happy crafting. Bye.